All right, welcome back in Alive Now. I'm Austin Westfall. We, of course, can't forget about the Iran connection here, the Hezbollah connection here. We've been talking so far largely about Gaza and about the Houthis, but since basically the beginning of this war, Hezbollah's tit for tat with the IDF along the Israel-Lebanon border has been a side story to the conflict in Gaza. But as of late, it's kind of become the main focus of our coverage. In recent weeks, the IDF eliminating a lot of top Hezbollah figures, including their top guy, Hassan Nasrallah. That came alongside a stunning attack in which Israel detonated personal pagers and walkie-talkies that were carried by Hezbollah members and affiliates. Hezbollah is an Iran-backed group, just like Hamas and the Houthis, and Behnam Ben Taleblu is an expert on Iranian security and political issues. He's also a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Hal Kempfer rounding out our coverage for the evening as well. So it's good to see both of you. Thank you for coming on, Behnam. I want to zoom out and think bigger picture here for a moment, because we've been talking about Hezbollah. I've talked with you on air about Hezbollah multiple times in recent weeks. My question is this. You and I have discussed this before. At this point, is it possible that Hezbollah is even capable of a war with Israel? How much have their forces been destroyed in recent weeks?
It's a pleasure to be with you, gentlemen. Thanks for having me. And it's a critical question because it's one that the IDF is using to assess its next move, both via air and via ground, against the Iran-backed proxy in Lebanon. Make no mistake, Hezbollah has always shown an ability to kind of exploit the chaos, just like its patron in Tehran has always often been able to better manage the chaos than us or the Israelis in a particular theater. Based on public reports, some of those reports have made their way into the New York Times using Israeli figures. Almost 60%, according to these reports, of that arsenal of unmanned aerial threats. That on the low end, it includes mortars. On the mid-tier, includes rockets and drones, IRAMs as well, anti-tank weapons. And on the higher tier, PGMs, precision-guided missiles, and even reportedly some ballistic missiles. We don't know what ratio of this 200,000 plus arsenal that 60% includes that has been captured or eviscerated on the battlefield. But nonetheless, this is a key priority, as well as kind of gutting the command and control of Lebanese Hezbollah to make sure they can't do what you ask, which is to be able to respond, to be able to regroup, to be able to live to fight another day.
So the big concern here has always been, since October 7th, that some sort of wider war might break out. Hal, I'll bounce the question off of you as well. If there was such a thing to happen, what is Hezbollah capable of at this point?
Well, Hezbollah is not capable of any significant offensive action at this point. They didn't have a large mechanized force. They couldn't do a lot by ground. They don't have an air force to speak of. What they have are missiles. They have missiles. They have indirect fire. You got mortars. Artillery to some extent, not much, but mostly with various different types of missile systems, all the way up from very tactical up to ballistic missiles. And the problem they have right now is, first off, most of that force has been destroyed, and as Behnam mentioned. And the other problem is that command and control. They've had a series of strikes taking out their top leaders, not only taking out their top leaders, but also taking out reportedly the leader of Al-Quds force may have been taken out, who happened to be in Beirut. And also, of course, one of the top IRGC leaders, Brigadier General, that was there. So they've taken out all these leaders. They did the pager attack, which took out this whole strata of leadership. Took out a communications path, took out the walkie-talkies. Now everybody's staring at their electrical appliances in their homes cautiously because of that. But it makes a very difficult ability to command and control, because you can't communicate. Not only you can't communicate, the folks you would have communicated with aren't there. And what I would bring out with Hezbollah, they're not a big up-and-out organization. The top leaders have been there for decades. They're not an organization that changes over top leadership or even mid-level leadership really that fast. And I think that's going to be a big problem for them, which is when you have a decapitation strike throughout all the ranks like this, plus the decimation, the destruction on the ground. I'm not sure exactly, aside from just basically defending in place, I'm not quite sure what they can manifest at this point.
So we're looking at a live picture at Haifa right now. It's a community in northern Israel. We have another live look, and we look at this image regularly around this time of night. This is a live image of the Beirut metro. It's not uncommon as of late to see IDF activity taking place in real time. Sometimes we see live strikes taking place in the Beirut metro. Behnam, I got to ask you, did Hamas's attack on October 7th, basically in an indirect way, give Israel an excuse to take a shot at crushing Hezbollah?
Well, it's a great question because the Israelis were asking themselves this between the end of the Hamas terrorist attack on October 7th and when they commenced military operations against Gaza days later. There was reportedly a debate as to in what direction should the IDF and IAF go. Should they go south first to deal with this issue, this particular proxy of the Islamic Republic, the lowest of the low of the axis of resistance? Or would this be an opportunity to be able to move from problem managing to problem solving? And indeed, even though the Israelis first went towards Gaza, built up the support for pushing back against the Iran-backed network there and had some impressive successes via air and via ground, ultimately, it was Hezbollah that made that choice for them by continuing to widen the war, to use different munitions, to fire at different targets, and to fire from and at different geographies. So Hezbollah widened the war. It was the first proxy of Iran to enter. While bodies were still being counted on October 8th, there was fire from the north. And incrementally, Hezbollah put itself into the position that it finds itself today. So while the Israelis did make that philosophical move from manager to solver because of the ferocity and the horrific nature of the October 7th terrorist attack, the steady stream of fire that the Israelis were not able, through standard and much more conventional means, were not able to knock off, that actually has ended up allowing the Israelis to deliver this very, very powerful, I don't want to call it a death blow yet, because you never know with the Middle East, things can always get worse, not better, but allow Israel to really gain the advantage through this kind of calculated escalation and go after command and control and elements of its arsenal. So in a sense, Hezbollah's ability to stay in the fight tactically may have opened the door for an Israeli strategic win here if followed through.
Right now we're looking at video from about a week ago. We saw these images live on our air as Iran took a direct strike at Israel. April, though, is when we first saw Iran target Israel directly instead of its proxies. So it went with its own ballistic missiles and drones instead of going through its normal channels. The second one, as I mentioned, it just happened on October 1st. So I'll ask you about both of these attacks at the same time. They both share a lot of similarities, don't they? Both happened in retaliation for Israel killing high-profile figures in Iran. Both times, Iran took their shot at Israel, and basically nothing came of it. The missiles were shot down, or they simply didn't make it. What did we learn about Iran's capabilities from these two events, Hal? And maybe another important question is, did Iran learn anything about Israel's defensive capabilities in the process?
Well, they did, actually. If you look at what they did the second time, the more recent attack, October 1st, one of the things they did is they concentrated their ballistic missiles into one, a lot of them, not all of them, but they concentrated a lot of them in a central area of Israel with the idea that they could overwhelm the Iron Dome defenses. It was an interesting idea. Didn't work out as well as they hoped, but some of the warheads did get through. Of course, some of the warheads get through because they get knocked off course, but warheads are warheads. They're going to land somewhere. And but they did get through. They did cause some damage. One of them actually literally landed 500 meters from the headquarters of Mossad. So that's a pretty accurate missile, although it's probably knocked a little bit off course, I think. But with that said, they did learn some things. They didn't use the drones. They learned that. That was a little bit different. But one of the things we've all learned is that despite all the, certainly the I would say almost overbearing, the rhetoric that comes out of Tehran, threatening that they're going to do these, overwhelming attacks that nobody can possibly resist. the simple reality, the battle space reality is that this is really what they have. This is what they can launch. And as of right now, it doesn't seem to be able to overcome Israeli defenses. And in fact, if you look at it, it's somewhat embarrassing for Iran because they've done two big attacks. They've launched, as near as we can tell, everything that they could have launched that could range Israel in these attacks, and they just didn't have much effect. And so this is having a huge impact, not to some extent militarily, probably to a bigger extent politically on Iran. That everybody looks at Iran and they say, I'm not sure they can really back up what they're saying. And now, of course, you see what's going on in Hezbollah with Hezbollah to the north. This all has a kind of a cumulative impact on the perception of Iran and its axis of resistance around the region.
So I want to just kind of ask about the response to this attack, because we're still waiting for Israel's response to Iran, aren't we? The goal, and I'm just going to work in a hypothetical here, Behnam, is the goal going to be to pack a punch from the Israeli perspective? Do they want to pack a punch in their response, yet not so much of a punch that it'll escalate things further? That is what they did during the initial attack back in April, correct?
Well, back in April, indeed, the Israelis launched a direct but unattributed or unclaimed strike on an Iranian radar facility. It was allegedly part of the radar for the S-300 Russian advanced surface-to-air missile defense system that was guarding or forward deployed to guard a nuclear facility in the area, as well as near a military base area as well. But ultimately, the Israelis proved, in contrast to the April 13, April 14 strike, that they could do much more damage with much less ordnances and with much less munitions, because simply they had that much more battle space capability and lethality to bring to bear. A sharp contrast to the large barrage but limited effect of the Islamic Republic back in April. I do think, though, that there were a lot of political constraints on the Israeli decision back in April 19th, and there will still be a lot of political constraints on those decisions today. I think one reason why you may have had the CENTCOM commander travel there recently, one reason why you may have even had not the strike materialize so far, or at least the date, which I think is now 5 or 6 days out, is because the Israelis are trying to meet and match some of these American red lines. While President Biden has talked about Israel's right to defend itself and indeed hinted that a response would be coming, he's also talked against or counseled against going after Iran's nuclear program and even counseled against going after the Islamic Republic's oil and energy facilities as well. So Israel may be trying to land a deterrent punch while staying within those U.S. red lines. The converse is, at least within the Israeli military establishment, what is the goal here? Is this deterrence by punishment? Is this defanging? Is this decapitation? And in terms of how many times this has to happen, because lest we forget, the Islamic Republic has made history now 3 times in 2024. 3 times in 2024, a non-nuclear weapon state has conventionally, directly, and from its own territory attacked nuclear weapon states. Pakistan once in January, and Israel twice, once in April and once in October. And this has not happened in history ever. The United States and the Soviet Union have never done this. And the Islamic Republic 3 times later is still standing and living to tell the tale. So there's a huge deterrence issue there. And so for the Israelis, they have to figure out, is this going to be an operation or is this going to be a campaign? And then the X factor for the Iranians is, did they escalate to de-escalate? Did they want to simply land a blow to touch the Israelis but stand back? How much of this is more political versus military for them? And ultimately, are they counting on this thing that we've seen out of the White House now, quite literally 1 year and counting since the October 7 terrorist attack, which is, despite America's talk about deterrence in the region, when push comes to shove, they opt for de-escalation. And ironically, the Islamic Republic, an adversary of America, may be counting on America to restrain its own ally in the region, Israel.
Okay, guys, so where do we go from here? I think we can all agree that neither Iran nor Israel want a full-scale war to break out. That's in nobody's interest. But when we see missiles flying from Iran to Israel, it scares the world. Does this all boil back down to the Israel-Hamas war negotiations? Do Israel, Hamas, and mediators like the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt need to get a truce done, release the hostages, and stop the fighting? Is that where the wider de-escalation has to begin, Behnam?
In my estimation, that's where many would like it to begin, but also in my estimation, and I'm a much better watcher of Iranian domestic politics than Israeli domestic politics, so you have to forgive me for pontificating here, but from what I can detect from far away, Likud is more popular. Benjamin Netanyahu is more popular now than before. Certainly more popular now than during the height of the judicial reform protest that predated the October 7 terrorist attack. And actually now there is more of a shift within that society, despite the hostage issue being a major electric and political rod socially in that country as well as politically. There still really is a support for that move from problem manager to problem solver, and that the people who lived on the periphery of Gaza in the south and who live on the northern front vis-a-vis Lebanese Hezbollah simply cannot go back to business as normal. And another, deconfliction agreement that locks Hamas or Hezbollah back into place means that there'll be yet another boom and bust cycle of violence that another generation of Israelis will have to endure. And I think that's where the popular support for actually doing more than just pushing back and containing this terrorist threat, but actually trying to defeat it will come. And in that sense, those who I think are trying to foist the political handcuffs onto this war may be missing that demographic and political reality within Israel. And then second, they miss Iran's strategy here. Iran's strategy is to continue a death by 1,000 cuts using all these proxies against Israel and never actually have to pay a price. I mean, in one sense, I respectfully disagree, Austin, because I think the Islamic Republic's success strategy in the past 2 decades against us, against the Israelis, against what's left of the pro-American order in the Middle East has been to deny for everybody a limited war option while enabling for itself and for its proxies a limited war option. So to some degree, they actually do seek conflict, but they seek to be able to exploit conflict within the political parameters where they can get away with it, or there can be no attribution, or there won't be any kind of kinetic retaliation.
Hal, I'll end it with you. Even if, hypothetically, the Israel-Hamas war comes to a ceasefire, there is still an uncomfortable question that we must face. How do you eliminate the terrorist problem? You can kill as many Hamas and Hezbollah terrorists as you want, but that doesn't necessarily eliminate the ideas that the organizations represent. There are a lot of angry people living and growing up in an active war zone today. Do people talk enough about the long-term terrorist problem?
Well, I think they do, and I think there's some things we can look at from the, if you will, the war on terror. And as you know, I'm a veteran of the war on terror. Multiple trips to the Middle East, extended trips, shall we say, dealing with that issue. And with that, look at ISIS. All right. They pushed out very quickly. They took a lot of terrain. They had what they called a caliphate, which was they had their own little national state, which at one time they actually controlled more terrain in terms of space than the size of Great Britain. That's pretty impressive considering from whence they came. Now, big push, pushed them back, basically destroyed them as, shall we say, a real estate organization. But ISIS still exists, still doing terrorist type stuff, lower level stuff. In and around Syria and Iraq. Another branch has taken off, of course, ISIS-K doing terrorist attacks, but they're not as big. And we have seen this in the past that these things will blow up. We push them back. And I hate to say it almost gets down to I don't want to say a manageable level of terrorism, but you get a lower level of terrorism. And really what you have to do is it becomes constant. And those who work counterterrorism will tell you it is a constant, ongoing thing. You never stop. You never declare victory. You're constantly looking. And by the way, if you take out Hezbollah as an organization, hold your breath, count to 3. There'll be another Shiite extremist organization pop up somewhere else with a slightly different name, and it will want to do terrorism. And we're going to see the same thing. Even if Hamas is wiped out as an organization, we're going to see something that will take up that mantra. So it never quite stops. If I could just mention one thing, though, Behnam, you brought up a great point. One of the things I do think that Israel will do, and I don't know when they're going to do it. I'm not holding my breath on any ceasefire thing happening real soon, but I do. Any type of major strike operation, you got to take out their air defense capabilities. And there's a rather interesting strategic option that Israel has, and they've proven that already with that strike in April. They can get in there and they can take out the radars and they can take out the air defense missiles. And if they were to do what we call destruction of enemy air defense, DEAD, yes, it does sound like dead. If they were to do that on a large scale, they would leave essentially Iran open. And I think, certainly with Netanyahu's overture to Iran, he is trying to separate the Iranian people from the government. That vulnerability, that strategic vulnerability, has a certain psychological element. I am sure that is being discussed in Israel right now, is doing that and then leaving a series of things opened to see if maybe they can kickstart something inside Iran. I would not be surprised. In fact, I would be very surprised if they weren't discussing that.
That sound about right to you, Behnam?
Well, actually, on this bit about the air defense, given that the last time they claimed an air defense, they struck but did not claim a single air defense radar. I think now if they go after the vast majority of them, Iran has nowhere near Israel's layered air and missile defense system, but it does have a patchwork of foreign procured and domestically put together SAMs. If they go after the mother lode of those facilities, the surface-to-air missiles, the radars, even if they do one step short of what Hal said, which is the suppression of the enemy air defenses, just to induce that shock, and then politically they go out there and they own it, they say we did it, there's some kind of video or some kind of press release, that could have a ripple effect too. We simply don't know. I mean, here, I'll tell you this interesting point about Iranian nationalism. Back in the late 1990s, the U.S. and Iran played a soccer match with each other during the World Cup. And the vast majority of dissident and diaspora Iranians still supported the national team. In the most recent World Cup, in the one in Qatar, I believe in 2022, in the fall winter, if I'm not mistaken, you had the same thing. The U.S. and the Iranians play a match during the tail end of that World Cup. But this time you had the vast majority of dissidents and diaspora and even Iranians domestically trash the home team. So this goes to show you how sticky this issue is, that the Islamic Republic of Iran is a poor guardian of the Iranian national interest. And it's just as this regime has defined itself in terms of Islamism rather than nationalism, and the population nationalism rather than Islamism, that gives the Israelis a political tool rather than just a military tool. And I would stress it's important not to squander that political tool. And I think creative ideas like what Hal mentioned are ways to be able to capitalize on those political tools.
We appreciate both of you tonight. We'll talk with you both very soon, I'm sure. Take care. Have a good rest of your night.